What would you do if your wedding vows were the opening shot in a revenge scheme? Arrogant billionaire Lucas Marshall thinks he's just won $1 million bet by marrying Khloe Richards. He looks at his new wife and sees another trophy for his collection. But he has no idea that for her, this marriage isn't the start of a life together, it's the start of his downfall. Let us know what you think of this twisted beginning. The only sound in the glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of Marshall Tower was the slide of Lucas Marshall's fountain pen as it signed the death warrant for a company that had existed for 3 generations. Across the polished ebony table, an older man with bloodshot eyes sat in stunned silence. He had just lost his family's legacy. Lucas didn't spare him a glance. He pushed the portfolio toward his lawyer, his voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. The merger will commence at 0900 tomorrow. Liquidate all non-essential assets. I want the operation running under the Marshall Global name by the end of the week. Mr. Marshall, the older man stammered. Please, my family. Lucas finally looked up. His gaze held no contempt or pity, but a terrifying emptiness, the absolute indifference of a god to an ant's plea. Business is not about family, sir. It is about war. And in war, the stronger side dictates history. You lost. He stood, adjusting his silk tie. Have a good evening. He walked out of the room, leaving the silent ruin he had created behind him without a second thought. To Lucas Marshall, the world was a grand chessboard, and he, with his intellect and ruthlessness, was the player, never the piece. That evening, at a rooftop bar of the city's most luxurious hotel, Lucas was enjoying his victory. The neon lights of the city spread out below him like a carpet of diamonds, reflected in his glass of expensive whiskey. Jack, his best friend and perhaps the only person who dared to be blunt with him, sat beside him, shaking his head in admiration. I just heard about Sterling Industries, Jack said, a note of awe in his voice. You're a shark, Lucas. You don't leave a single scrap. Lucas shrugged, a smug half-smile on his lips. That's the nature of the game, Jack. There's no room for weakness. So, is there anything you can't conquer? Jack asked, slightly intoxicated. What about women? Every girl you date is a carbon copy of the last. Beautiful, admiring, and ready to comply. Because I know what I want, Lucas replied curtly. And I know how to get it. It was that very self-assurance that sparked Jack's wild idea. He pulled out his phone, swiped through it, and then held the screen up to Lucas. The photo showed a woman at an art exhibition. She wore a simple dress, her hair fell naturally, and her eyes looked directly into the camera, unflinching, holding a profound intelligence and independence. She didn't have the flashy, ostentatious beauty of the women Lucas usually entertained, but a quiet, powerful grace. Khloe Richards, Jack said. An artist. Brilliant, independent, and I bet she wouldn't give a capitalist like you a second glance. She's everything you're not. Lucas stared at the photo. Something in the woman's eyes ignited his conqueror's instinct. A challenge. What are you getting at? Jack grinned, the mischievous smile of a man laying down an irresistible bait. I dare you. $1 million. You have to marry her. Convince her to live with you for 6 months. Not by force, but by getting her to agree. 6 months, Lucas. Let's see if you can conquer someone who can't be bought with money. To anyone else, it was a meaningless joke. But to Lucas, whose ego was taller than the tower that bore his name, it was a declaration of war. He hated the idea of anything in the world being beyond his reach. $1 million? Lucas scoffed. You're on. Get your checkbook ready, Jack. The first meeting was arranged at Le Ciel, an exclusive restaurant where the price of dinner could feed a family for a month. Lucas arrived early, choosing a corner table with a commanding view, a habit of a man who always needed to be in control. He was ready for a display of power, but when Khloe Richards walked in, all his scripts became useless. She didn't arrive in a glamorous evening gown. Instead, She wore a simple, deep blue sheath dress that subtly highlighted her elegant figure. She moved with a natural poise, utterly unimpressed by the surrounding opulence. Her eyes scanned the crowd and landed on him without a hint of hesitation. "Mr. Marshall," she said as she sat down, her voice low and clear. There was no shyness or admiration, only composure. "Ms. Richards," Lucas replied, offering the smile that had closed hundreds of deals for him. "Thank you for coming." "I was curious," she said directly, skipping the pleasantries. "Why would a man like you want to meet an artist like me?" They talked through the meal. Lucas tried to probe, to find a desire, a weakness he could exploit. He spoke of his world, of travel, parties, power. But Khloe only listened, occasionally asking sharp questions that made him realize she saw not just the glittering surface but also the empty spaces beneath. She was not impressed. Finally, as dessert was served, Lucas decided it was time. He began talking about a unique proposal of partnership, a temporary arrangement of mutual benefit. He was carefully choosing his words, trying to frame the arranged marriage as an attractive business contract. Khloe set her silver fork down, the small sound echoing in the quiet space. She looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time that evening, Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "Mr. Marshall," she interrupted, her voice still calm but now filled with weight, "let's dispense with the theatrics. I know about the wager." Silence enveloped their table. Lucas's smile froze. For the first time in years, he was genuinely surprised. He was used to being 3 steps ahead of everyone, but this woman seemed to be waiting at the finish line. Khloe continued, giving him no time to recover. "I know about the $1 million. I know about the 6 months. I even know the terms set by your friend, Jack." Lucas leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he re-evaluated her. The surprise was quickly replaced by an intense curiosity. This woman was more dangerous than he'd thought. "If you know," he said slowly, "why are you here?" A mysterious smile, fleeting as a ghost, touched Khloe's lips. "Because, like you, I have my own reasons. And your proposal, despite its childish origins, happens to align with my plans." She leaned forward, her eyes no longer calm but glinting with a sharp, calculated light. "I will accept. I will be your wife for 6 months, but on my terms." "I'm listening," Lucas said, feeling the game had just become infinitely more interesting. "First, my private life is inviolable. My work, my friends, my time. You will not interfere. Second, this is a contract, not a marriage. There will be no expectations of an emotional or physical nature. We are business partners for 6 months, nothing more. Third, after 6 months, we will go our separate ways quietly. No strings, no attachments." She paused, looking deep into his eyes. "And the final, most important term. Do not ever underestimate me, Mr. Marshall. Do not ever think you can control me. If you violate any of these terms, the agreement is terminated immediately." Lucas looked at the woman before him. She wasn't negotiating. She was dictating. He had never met anyone like her. His pride screamed at him to refuse, to prove who was in charge. But another part of him, the predatory instinct, was captivated by the challenge. He extended his hand. "I agree to your terms, Ms. Richards." Khloe looked at his hand for a moment before taking it. Her handshake was firm, decisive. It was not the beginning of a marriage. It was the sealing of a hidden pact, a truce before the real battle began. As Khloe left, Lucas Marshall sat there alone. For the first time in his life, he had just signed a deal he wasn't entirely sure he could win. He looked out the window, where the city still glittered at his feet, but his usual sense of absolute dominion had been replaced by a disturbing question. After all, who was the predator in this game, and who was the prey? Lucas Marshall and Khloe Richards' wedding did not take place in a historic church or a romantic garden, but in a cold, sterile registration office at City Hall. There were no guests, no flowers, no music. Just them, two lawyers as witnesses, and a registrar with a voice as monotonous as a machine. The entire event took 15 minutes. When the registrar said, "You may now kiss the bride," an awkward silence fell. Lucas looked at Khloe, who met his gaze with placid eyes. He leaned down and placed a fleeting, light kiss on her lips, a procedural kiss, devoid of warmth, like pressing a seal onto a finalized contract. Immediately after, he took her to what would be their home for the next 6 months, the penthouse that occupied the top 2 floors of Marshall Tower. When the private elevator doors opened, a vast space was revealed. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls displayed a panoramic view of New York City. The interior was minimalist but staggeringly expensive, featuring pieces from world-renowned designers. Everything, from the lighting to the temperature, was controlled by a touch on a tablet. This was not a home. It was a monument to Lucas's power and wealth. He stood there, arms crossed, expecting a reaction, astonishment, admiration, anything. But Khloe merely walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the space like an art critic evaluating an installation. She was not overwhelmed. "My things will be delivered later," she said, breaking the silence. "Where's my room?" That question, simple yet decisive, immediately drew an invisible line. "My room, not our room." Lucas gestured toward a hallway. "The east wing is yours. It has a bedroom, a study, and a private balcony." He had arranged it that way to give her space, but he now realized it was also how she would build her own fortress right in the middle of his territory. In the following days, Lucas launched a material assault. He believed that everything had its price, and he was determined to find Khloe's. Dozens of boxes from the most exclusive fashion houses were delivered, filled with clothes, handbags, and shoes. A brand new silver convertible sports car was parked in the garage with a large bow on its hood. An exquisite diamond necklace was placed on the vanity in her room. Khloe's reaction was more infuriating to him than an outright refusal. The designer boxes remained in a corner of her room, unopened. The car keys were placed neatly back on the main hall's kitchen counter. The diamond necklace was put back in its case, accompanied by a small, handwritten note, "Thank you, but this isn't me." This polite but absolute rejection was a thorn in Lucas's pride. In his world, women vied for these things. He could buy loyalty, admiration, even love, but the woman living in his own home was indifferent to it all. It left him both angry and bewildered. He didn't understand. The battle wasn't just material, it spilled over into their lifestyles. "There's a Rockefeller Foundation charity gala tonight," he announced one morning. "I want you to come with me. The press will be there. As my wife, you need to make an appearance." Khloe looked up from her cup of tea, her eyes untroubled. "Our agreement states no interference with my personal time. I have plans with old friends tonight." "Friends?" Lucas frowned. "You can see them another time. This is important." "To you, perhaps," she replied, her tone gentle but sharp. "But to me, an evening with people who genuinely care about me is more important than a fake social event." He tried to attack her final fortress, her work. "You should consider taking a break from your studio," he suggested. "You don't need to work for money anymore. Enjoy life." This time, she put her cup down and looked at him directly. "Some things, Mr. Marshall, are not about money. They are about passion, about purpose." "I'm afraid that's a concept you might find difficult to understand." The statement was like an invisible blow. Lucas, who could put a price on everything from a company to a work of art, suddenly realized he couldn't put a price on this woman's purpose. Out of a strange curiosity, he drove to the neighborhood of her art studio one day. It was an old brick building, a complete contrast to his world of glass and steel. He sat in his car, looking through the window, and saw her inside, working, her face focused, her hands smeared with paint. She looked happy. A while later, he drove past the small cafe she frequented and saw her sitting and laughing with two friends. He was just an outsider, looking into a warm, genuine world to which he did not belong. That feeling, the feeling of being excluded, was foreign and unsettling to Lucas. Gradually, the nature of his battle changed. It was no longer an effort to conquer, but an obsession to understand. He began to observe her. He noticed how she always chose chamomile tea before bed, how she had a habit of watching the city in silence from her private balcony at dusk, or the intensity in her eyes when she found a new idea for a painting. These small details, meaningless to anyone else, became pieces of a complex puzzle he couldn't solve. One evening, they were both in the vast living room, separated by a great distance. He was scrolling through financial reports on his tablet. She was reading a book. The silence between them was no longer that of a truce, but a tense, parallel existence. He decided to break it. "I'm considering the acquisition of a tech firm in Silicon Valley." "The profits." "Lucas," she interrupted suddenly, without looking up from her book. "When you were a child, who did you dream of becoming?" The question was so irrelevant and unexpected that it stopped him cold. He couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him a question that wasn't about work, money, or power. A child? He had buried that child long ago, under tons of ambition and ruthlessness. He didn't know how to answer. "I don't remember," he answered curtly, annoyed at his own disorientation. She said nothing more, simply turning a page. But her question lingered in the air, like a mote of dust in a sunbeam, tiny but impossible to ignore. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. He stood by the glass wall, looking down at the kingdom he had built. In the past, this view had always filled him with a sense of absolute power. But tonight, all he felt was a strange emptiness. He realized his frustration with Khloe had morphed into something else. It was a fascination, an obsession to understand the one person on whom his money and power had no effect. He had entered a game, but his opponent wasn't moving any of the pieces as he'd predicted. She simply existed, steadfast and mysterious, forcing him to question the very nature of his own game. Lucas Marshall, who had never lost, felt like he was losing. And the scariest part was, for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he actually wanted to win. Weeks passed, and a strange, fragile equilibrium settled in the penthouse. The Cold War had subsided, replaced by a wary, parallel existence. Lucas, in an effort he didn't fully understand himself, had stopped trying to control Khloe. Instead, he became a silent observer. He no longer saw her as an opponent to be subdued, but as a profound mystery he had to solve, because his own peace of mind now depended on it. The shift began on a day in mid-September. Lucas noticed a change in Khloe. Already reserved, she became even more distant. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, her eyes looking through everything, including him. She didn't go to her studio, nor did she read. She simply existed in a silent, dense sorrow that he could feel in the air. That evening, unable to bear the torturous silence any longer, he sought her out. He found her in her private study, which she used as a small studio. The only light came from a desk lamp, illuminating a sheet of charcoal paper. She was drawing, but her sketches lacked their usual finesse. They were chaotic, angry lines, forming sharp, overlapping shapes in a mess of anguish. The work radiated a raw pain. Seeing that, something in Lucas broke. Curiosity had turned into an unbearable urgency. He could not continue to live in the shadow of a secret that wasn't his. He needed an answer. He found her on her private balcony, standing with her back to the glittering city below. The night wind was strong, whipping her hair around her. She looked impossibly small and lonely amidst the grandeur of New York. He approached, the sound of his shoes echoing on the marble. She didn't turn around. "Khloe," he began, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance, containing a weariness and a surprising sincerity. "We can't go on like this." She remained silent. He came to stand beside her, leaning on the railing. "I've lost," he admitted, the words coming out with difficulty. "This wager. This game. I've lost. I can't understand you. I can't control you. And honestly, I don't want to anymore." He turned to look at her, his eyes almost pleading. "But I need to know. What is your secret? The pain I see in your eyes, where does it come from? Tell me the truth, please." Khloe turned, facing him. In the dim light of the city, her eyes were deep and cold like a winter lake. The usual defensiveness was gone, replaced by a frightening resolve. She had decided. It was time. "The truth?" she repeated, a bitter smile flashing across her lips. "The truth is a luxury, Lucas. Are you sure you want it? It might destroy you." "I have to know," he insisted. She nodded slowly. "All right." She took a deep breath, as if gathering strength for a final assault. "Do you ever think about the names behind the numbers on your balance sheets? The lives behind the companies you crush?" The question confused him. "That's business. Sterling Industries." She said the name, each syllable clear and sharp like a shard of broken glass. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Lucas frowned, searching his memory. It was an acquisition from a few years ago. A successful, efficient deal. He didn't remember the details. A small manufacturing company. It was absorbed. Why? The indifference in his voice seemed to be the final match that lit the fire within Khloe. "To you, it was a small manufacturing company. To me, it was everything." Her gaze locked onto his, giving him no escape. "My name is Khloe Richards, but my father was David Richards, the founder, and the soul, of Sterling Industries." Time seemed to stop. Lucas felt the blood freeze in his veins. He tried to connect the pieces, and a horrifying realization began to creep into his mind. Khloe gave him no time to process. Her voice became cold, reciting the story like a witness at a trial. "My father built that company from nothing. He was an honest man, Lucas. He treated his employees like family. Until the shark, you, showed up. You used dirty financial tactics, created a false crisis, and devoured his company in less than a month." I didn't know," Lucas stammered. "The excuse is meaningless." "That's right, you didn't know," she nearly shouted, her composure finally breaking. "You never know. You just sit in your office moving numbers around while my father had to face the workers he was forced to lay off, the people who had trusted him. You took more than his company. You took his honor, his self-respect." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing with anger and pain. "He lost everything, Lucas. And when a man like my father loses everything, he has no reason to live." She paused, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "My father committed suicide 2 weeks later. He hanged himself in the empty warehouse of the company he spent his life building." A blow. Lucas felt as if someone had just punched him in the chest, knocking all the air out. The world tilted around him. He grabbed the railing to stay upright. Sterling Industries was no longer a line item on an old contract. It now had a face, a name, a tragedy. "Khloe. My God, I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" She laughed, a bitter sound more painful than tears. "Does your sorrow bring him back? Does it erase the nights my mother and I cried ourselves to sleep? Does it give me back the life you stole?" He looked at her, completely broken, not knowing what to say, what to do. He wanted to reach out and touch her, but he knew he had no right. His hands were stained. And then, just when he thought nothing could be worse, she delivered the final blow. The rage in her eyes softened, replaced by a pain so deep, so raw, It was unbearable to witness. Her voice broke. "But you didn't just take my father, Lucas. You took more than that." Tears began to stream down her cheeks. "The day I got the news about my father, I was at the hospital. I was pregnant, a boy. And the shock, the stress, the grief, it was too much. I lost the baby soon after." Lucas Marshall's entire world disintegrated into dust. He could no longer hear the wind, no longer see the city lights. All he could feel was the crushing weight of a crime he didn't even know he had committed. He hadn't just destroyed a business, he had destroyed a family. He had caused the death of a father and an unborn child. He stumbled back, his mouth open but no sound coming out. He looked at Khloe, the woman he had tried to conquer, and now all he saw was the reflection of the monster he was. Khloe, seemingly drained of all energy after releasing the burden she had carried for so long, looked at him one last time. Her gaze no longer held hatred, only a profound, empty sorrow. "Now you know," she said softly. "This wager was never a game. It was a haunting. I wanted you here, in the very world you built on the suffering of others, to feel even a fraction of what I went through. The powerlessness, the loss." She turned, walked back inside, and slid the glass door shut, its soft click sounding like the final gavel of a judge delivering a life sentence. Lucas was left alone on the balcony, suspended between the sky and the earth. He collapsed, his knees hitting the cold stone hard. The weight of his guilt, of the truth, had finally crushed him. The man who had always stood at the top of the world was now kneeling in his own ashes. Lucas didn't know how long he knelt on the cold stone of the balcony. Time had lost all meaning. New York City, the kingdom he had conquered, now seemed to mock him. Every lit window was an accusation. Every siren's wail from below a cry of mourning. He had built an empire on a foundation of destruction, and now, he was being buried under its weight. Finally, as the first gray ash strokes of dawn painted the sky, he staggered to his feet. His body was numb with cold, but that chill was nothing compared to the ice in his soul. He went inside. The penthouse, once the ultimate symbol of his power, had transformed into a prison of glass and steel, a vast space filled with emptiness and guilt. That morning, Khloe's punishment began. It did not come in the form of screams or hateful tears. It came in a form far more cruel: absolute silence. When he entered the kitchen, she was already there, making coffee. She moved with a terrifying calm, as if he were made of air. She took one mug, poured coffee for herself, and walked out to the balcony, passing him without a single glance. His existence had been erased. He was no longer a person in her eyes, but a ghost in his own home. Throughout the day, the torturous pantomime continued. He tried to speak, his voice hoarse and broken. "Khloe," but she would simply stand up and move to another room. If he sat in the living room, she would go to the library. If he entered the library, she would return to her bedroom and close the door. Silence became a weapon, sharper and more effective than any accusation. Her presence was a constant, screaming reminder of his crimes. Every breath she took in the apartment seemed to whisper the names: David Richards, an unborn child. Lucas felt he was going insane. He, the man accustomed to commanding boardrooms and manipulating stock markets, was utterly powerless against a woman who wouldn't speak a word. The luxurious penthouse became a mausoleum, and he was being buried alive with the ghosts of his own making. 2 days later, Jack arrived. He rang the doorbell several times with no answer. Worried, he used the emergency access code Lucas had given him. Jack walked in, his usual cheerful demeanor instantly extinguished by the heavy, suffocating atmosphere inside. He found Lucas in his study, but he wasn't working. He was just sitting there, in the dark, staring at a blank computer screen. He was unshaven, his clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were hollow and lifeless. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "Lucas, what's wrong with you?" Jack asked, his voice laced with concern. "You look terrible. Is it something with Khloe? Did she leave?" Lucas turned his head slowly, like a rusted machine. "She's still here," he said, his voice dry and foreign. "Then what the hell is going on?" Jack lost his patience. "The wager is almost over. You don't look like a man about to win $1 million. The word wager was like a switch. Something in Lucas's empty eyes flickered, a raw spark of pain. "There is no wager, Jack," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "There never was. What are you talking about?" Lucas stood up, walked to the bar, and poured himself a stiff drink, his hand trembling. He downed it in one go. "Do you remember Sterling Industries?" Jack frowned. "That company you took over a few years ago?" "Sure, why?" "The founder was David Richards," Lucas continued, reciting the facts mechanically, as if reading his own indictment. "He was Khloe's father." Jack's mouth fell open. "What? That's an insane coincidence." "It wasn't a coincidence," Lucas interrupted. "He killed himself after he lost the company." Silence filled the room. Jack stood frozen, his face pale. The joke, the wager, the entire frivolous nature of their wealthy world suddenly felt grotesque. "Oh my God, Lucas." "There's more," Lucas continued, his voice breaking. "She was pregnant at the time. And she lost the baby." A thud echoed in the room. Jack had dropped his leather briefcase. He stared at Lucas, not with pity, but with absolute horror. The burden of guilt was no longer Lucas's alone. It had spread. Jack realized that his harmless amusement, a wager born of boredom and a little too much alcohol, had ignited the explosion of a tragedy he could never have imagined. He, too, was responsible. I didn't know," Jack stammered, the exact same words Lucas had once thought. "I just thought it was a game." "We all did," Lucas said, his voice full of self-loathing. "That's the problem." Jack sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. His simple worldview, where everything could be bought or won, had just been destroyed. He had helped turn a person's deepest pain into a sport. After a long moment, Jack looked up, a new resolve in his eyes. "I have to talk to her." "Don't," Lucas said. "She won't want to hear it." "I don't care." Jack stood up. "I can't just walk away. I started this. I have to face her." He found Khloe in her small studio. She was standing before a blank canvas, not painting. Just standing, motionless. When she saw Jack, a flicker of surprise crossed her face before it was quickly replaced by a cold mask. "What do you want?" she asked. Jack entered, closing the door behind him. He made no attempt to make excuses or explain. He looked her directly in the eye, and for the first time in his life, the man who had always lived an easy life looked truly pained. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice sincere and unadulterated. "There are no words to describe how sorry I am. I turned your tragedy into a form of entertainment. I turned your pain into a wager. It was a disgusting, selfish, and unforgivable thing to do. I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I am truly sorry." Khloe stared at him, her silence a formidable fortress. She had been prepared to deal with Lucas's arrogance, the indifference of his world. But she had not been prepared for this genuine remorse from his best friend. She said nothing. She just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. But for Jack, it was enough. He knew he had been heard. He bowed his head, turned, and left, leaving her alone with the blank canvas and her own thoughts. Jack's appearance had done something Lucas couldn't. It had pierced the shell of her plan for revenge. She had painted a simple picture in her head. Lucas was the monster, and his world was filled with more just like him. But Jack's sincere contrition had smeared that black and white picture with complex shades of gray. It planted a tiny seed of doubt in her heart. Was change truly impossible? That night, as Lucas sat alone in the darkness, he knew Jack had gone to see Khloe. He didn't ask. He had no right. He just sat there, accepting his punishment, drowning in the silence and the burden of guilt that he now no longer had to bear alone. But that didn't make it any lighter. It only showed him how far his destruction had spread. In the days following Jack's confession, the silence in the penthouse remained, but its nature had changed. It was no longer an absolute void, but a space heavy with unspoken thoughts. Lucas was still a ghost, but he now carried the weight of his guilt consciously. He didn't run from it, he accepted it. He spent his days in the library, not reading financial reports, but researching the small companies he had destroyed, trying to face the true scale of the devastation he had caused. Each name, each story, was another cut to his conscience. Khloe, meanwhile, was imprisoned by her own plan for revenge. Jack's sincere apology had shaken the foundation of her hatred. She had painted a black and white world where Lucas and those like him were the personification of pure evil. But Jack's remorse, and now Lucas's silent self-flagellation, had added complex shades of gray to that picture. She still kept her distance, still maintained her punishment of silence, but deep inside, a fierce struggle was taking place. Resentment was wrestling with a new, unsettling emotion: understanding. It was when their inner worlds were at their most precarious that the outside world decided to attack. It started quietly. A few troubling headlines in business journals. Whispers in the financial world about Lucas Marshall's sudden change in behavior. Shares of Marshall Global began to see unusual dips. Lucas, immersed in his torment, ignored it all. The empire he once considered his lifeblood now seemed unimportant, and that was when the vulture smelled carrion. Marcus Vance, Lucas's oldest and most ruthless competitor, had been waiting for an opportunity like this for years. He was a mirror image of the man Lucas used to be, a cold-blooded predator who saw business as a war with no prisoners. He saw Lucas's weakness, and he struck. The blow came not from the stock market, but from the front page of a leading tabloid. One morning, the newspaper delivery left a bombshell on the penthouse doorstep. The large, bold headline screamed, "CEO Marshall's secret contract marriage, $1 million wager or a sign of collapse?" The article was filled with half-truths and malicious fabrications. It spoke of a bet, of a mysterious artist wife, and implied that Lucas was losing his grip, that his recent business decisions were a sign of mental instability. The source, of course, was anonymous, but Lucas knew immediately who was behind it. Only Jack knew the details of the wager, and Jack would never betray him. That meant Marcus had had him followed, had disgustingly dug into his private life. Lucas's phone began to ring incessantly. Board members, investors, lawyers. He ignored them all. When the newspaper was placed on the dining table, he only glanced at it, a bitter, empty smile on his lips. He deserved this. This was karma. He had ruined others' lives, and now it was his turn. He accepted it. Khloe saw the article. She read every word, her face expressionless. She saw her name dragged into a public scandal, her private life exposed. But she didn't feel angry. She only felt a profound exhaustion. Her plan for revenge had spun out of her control, turning into a media circus. The real storm hit the next day. Marcus Vance officially launched a hostile takeover, urging shareholders to sell their stakes, promising to restore stability and vision to Marshall Global. The company's stock plummeted. An emergency board meeting was called. Lucas finally had to face reality. He put on a suit, but it seemed too large for his thinned frame. He went to the boardroom, where the faces that once admired him were now filled with anxiety and suspicion. He listened to the accusations, the questions about his judgment, about his personal life. He did not defend himself. "They're right," he told the board members. his voice flat. "I've made terrible decisions. I am no longer fit to lead this company." He placed a folder on the table. "This is my resignation. I will cooperate with the transition." In the penthouse, Khloe watched the developments on the financial news. She saw Marcus Vance's smug face on TV, giving an interview about the bright future of Marshall Global under his leadership. She looked into Marcus's eyes, and she recognized something terrifyingly familiar. It was the look of a predator, the look of a shark unconcerned with the smaller creatures it devoured. It was the exact look she had always imagined on Lucas's face years ago. A shiver ran down her spine. Her plan was to make Lucas pay. But she had never wanted to hand his empire over to another monster identical to him. To let Marcus win with these dirty tactics, digging into private lives, making personal attacks, was tantamount to admitting that their methods were right. It was tantamount to letting another version of the man who destroyed her father win all over again. Her hatred for Lucas was still there, but another, stronger feeling began to rise. Contempt for Marcus Vance and his kind. Her enemy wasn't just a man named Lucas Marshall. Her enemy was the entire ruthless, unfeeling system he had once been a part of. When Lucas returned, his face was ashen, like a man returning from a funeral. He went straight to his study, put down his briefcase, and sat at his desk, utterly defeated. Khloe stood in the doorway, observing him. The silence between them this time had a different meaning. It was no longer a punishment. It was the lull before a new storm. "Are you just going to give up?" she asked, her voice the first sound she had willingly directed at him in weeks. Lucas looked up, surprised. "It's over, Khloe. I deserve this." "My father was not a quitter," she said, her voice sharp. "He fought until his last breath. He was defeated by treacherous tricks, not in a fair fight." She walked into the room, picking up a report Marcus had sent to the shareholders, something Lucas had tossed aside. "I've read his strategy. He's using the same moves you used on Sterling Industries. Creating panic, divide and conquer, attacking personal weaknesses." She put the report down on the desk, right in front of him. "You can hate yourself all you want, Lucas. You can punish yourself for the rest of your life. But you do not have the right to let someone like him win with the very weapons that destroyed my family." Lucas looked at her, confused. "What do you want me to do? You hate me. You want me to pay." "Yes," she admitted, her eyes unflinching. "But I hate injustice more. I will not stand by and watch history repeat itself." She looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, they were not enemies, not creditor and debtor of a blood debt. They were the only two people in that room, facing a common enemy. "You may have built this empire with the wrong methods," she said, "but it is still yours, and I will not let another vulture pick at its corpse." She took a pen and a blank sheet of paper. "Now," she said, her voice filled with authority and strategy, "tell me every weakness Marcus Vance has." The silence was broken. The Cold War was over. An unlikely alliance, forged from the ashes of revenge and the weight of guilt, had just been born. Part 6. The True Journey of Atonement. The penthouse, once a prison of silence, had now transformed into a war room. Long nights bled into one another, illuminated by the glow of computer screens and fueled by cold coffee. For the first time, Lucas and Khloe truly talked, but their language was one of strategy, financial analysis, and media plans. He provided his intimate knowledge of his empire, while she brought a sharp, strategic mind, an outsider's perspective, and a moral compass he had long since lost. They were a strange but shockingly effective team. Lucas realized Khloe didn't just have an artist's soul. She possessed a strategic intellect that rivaled any competitor he had ever faced. In turn, Khloe saw a different Lucas. No longer the ruthless shark, he was now like a disgraced general, fighting not for ambition, but for what little honor he had left. Their plan went against all of Lucas's old instincts. Instead of retaliatory attacks, Khloe proposed a strategy of transparency. Marcus's only weapons are shadows and rumors, she said during a discussion at 3 a.m. The only way to defeat shadows is to turn on the lights. The climax of their battle was an emergency shareholder meeting. Marcus Vance had prepared a grand speech, ready to expose Lucas's instability. But Lucas, coached by Khloe, went first. He walked up to the podium, not with his usual arrogance, but with a strange humility. He didn't make excuses for the tabloid article. He owned it. "Yes," he said to hundreds of astonished eyes, "my marriage began under unusual circumstances. And yes, over the past few months, I have been facing profound personal issues. I have taken a hard look at myself, at the way I have run this company, and I did not like what I saw." He did not tell Khloe's story. That was hers to keep. But he confessed his own sins. "For years, I ran Marshall Global with a single philosophy: win at all costs. I crushed competitors. I treated people like numbers. I was wrong." He presented a new vision for the company, one built on sustainable growth, fair practices, and social responsibility, ideas that Khloe had outlined. It was a massive gamble. But his raw honesty, combined with the sharp logic of the restructuring plan, had an unexpected effect. The major shareholders, tired of destructive takeover battles, saw a different path. The vote of confidence was held. Lucas won. Marcus Vance was defeated, not by a more ruthless attack, but by a better vision. When the news was announced, a different kind of silence fell over the penthouse. The battle was over. Their reason for collaboration was gone. They were once again two strangers, bound by a tragic past. Lucas was the one to break it. He stood before her, looking tired but more at peace than ever. "Thank you, Khloe. I couldn't have done it without you." "I didn't do it for you," she replied, though her voice had lost its cold edge. "I did it to fight against men like Marcus." "I know," he nodded. "But it's still not enough." He looked out the window at the vast city. "Winning back my company can't erase what I've done. Now, I have to face the rest of it. Alone." The next day, he told her he was leaving. He gave her an address. "This is where I'm going. I don't know how long I'll be." Khloe looked at the piece of paper. It was an address in a working-class neighborhood, far from the gleaming skyscrapers. She recognized the street name. It was where Mr. Fawn, one of her father's most loyal factory foremen, used to live. Her heart tightened. She only nodded, saying nothing, and watched him leave. A part of her was still skeptical, thinking this was just another performance. But another, growing part of her felt a fragile flicker of hope. Lucas drove to the small neighborhood, each block he passed highlighting the contrast with his own world. There was life here, children playing, neighbors greeting each other. His world had only silence and transactions. He parked a block away and walked, feeling like an intruder. He stood before a small house, its paint beginning to peel. He took a deep breath, feeling a fear he'd never known in billion-dollar negotiations. He knocked on the door. The man who opened it was about her age, his eyes weary and wary. But when he recognized Lucas, that wariness turned into a blaze of pure hatred. "You," he snarled. "You have the nerve to show your face here?" "My name is Leo," the young man said, his voice trembling with rage. "Son of Mr. Fawn. Do you have any idea what you did to my father? After the company collapsed, he was never the same. He lost his purpose. You killed him slowly." "I know," Lucas said, his voice hoarse. "I came here to what? Apologize?" Leo laughed bitterly. "Will your apology give my father back his peaceful final years?" He took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Get out of here. Get out of my house." Lucas didn't move. He just stood there, accepting all of Leo's rage. "I won't leave until you hear me out." "I have nothing to say to you," Leo shouted, and unable to control himself any longer, he swung a punch straight at Lucas's face. The blow was hard, snapping Lucas's head to the side, and a trickle of blood ran from the corner of his lip. He staggered, but he didn't fight back. He didn't even fall. He just straightened up, looking Leo directly in the eye. "I deserve that," he said, his voice clear and without a trace of anger. And more. It was that reaction that stunned Leo. He had been prepared for an argument, an arrogant defense, even a fight. He had not been prepared for this complete acceptance. The door opened wider. An older woman, her face etched with hardship but her eyes still kind, emerged. It was Mrs. Fawn. "Leo, stop," she said gently, then turned to Lucas. "Please, come in." Inside, the house was modest but clean. Lucas sat on the old sofa, feeling completely out of place. He spoke to them, not as a powerful CEO, but as a guilt-ridden man. He didn't offer them money. He just listened to their story, of their struggles, of their loss. And then, he apologized. A sincere, naked apology, without a single excuse. He stayed for a long time. When he left, no forgiveness had been spoken, but the hatred in the air had dissipated, replaced by a heavy understanding. That evening, Khloe's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, "Hello? Khloe, is that you, dear?" A kind, female voice said. "It's Mrs. Fawn." Khloe sat up straight. "Mrs. Fawn? Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, dear," she said. "It's just, Lucas Marshall was here today. He spoke with me and Leo." She paused, then her voice trembled slightly. "I looked into his eyes, Khloe. I saw true remorse. I think that boy has really changed." Khloe was speechless. She said her thanks and hung up, her heart pounding. The validation from another victim, someone with no reason to lie, had broken her final defense. Her revenge had begun with the intent to destroy a man, but it had ended in his rebirth. This outcome was beyond anything she had predicted, and it forced her to face an even harder question. If Lucas could change, could she forgive? She walked to the balcony and looked down at the street. A moment later, Lucas's car pulled in. He got out, his face bruised, but his posture was no longer defeated or arrogant. He looked calm. He looked up, and their eyes met across the distance. This time, she did not look away. That night, when Lucas returned, Khloe was waiting. She said nothing, just quietly retrieved the first aid kit from a cabinet. He sat on the sofa, and she gently cleaned the dried blood from his lip, dabbing antiseptic on the bruise on his cheek. Her touch was not that of a nurse, nor that of a wife. It was a gesture of pure compassion, a simple act of care that broke down every remaining barrier between them. "She called me," Khloe said softly, her hands still at work. "Mrs. Fawn." Lucas closed his eyes, not from the physical sting, but from the weight of her impending words. "She told me everything," she continued. "She said, she saw the remorse in your eyes." He didn't answer. No words were adequate. Khloe put the cotton swab down, stepped back, and looked at him. Her gaze no longer held hatred or coldness, only a deep weariness and a newfound clarity. "My plan was to destroy you, Lucas. I wanted you to experience loss, powerlessness. I wanted to break you into pieces." She paused, a sad smile touching her lips. "And I succeeded. But I never expected that, from those ruins, a different man would be built." She took a deep breath, as if releasing a final burden. "The past will never disappear. It will always be a part of us. The scar of my father, of the child I lost, will never fully heal." She looked him directly in the eye. "But maybe, it doesn't have to be our future anymore. I don't want to spend the rest of my life as an avenger. I want to be free." And in that moment, Lucas understood. Her freedom was also his salvation. Forgiveness was too simple a word for what was happening. This was a mutual release. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the penthouse transformed completely. The tense silence was replaced by quiet conversations. They ate breakfast together, talking about small things. He told her about the childhood dreams he'd forgotten, about the pressure of inheriting an empire. She shared with him her passion for art, about how she saw colors and shapes and emotions. Laughter, a sound that had seemed extinct in this home, began to return. At first, it was hesitant smiles, then it grew more natural. He visited her studio, not as an investor assessing an asset, but with the genuine curiosity of a student. He learned to distinguish between impressionism and expressionism, and he realized that in her paintings, he could see her soul. In turn, she began to take an interest in his work. She read his new plans for Marshall Global, contributing sharp insights about business ethics and social responsibility. He didn't just listen. He actively changed his strategies based on her advice. They were rebuilding, not just their own lives, but his empire, on a new foundation. The 6-month deadline of their contract was approaching, hanging in the air like a cloud. But they both ignored it, as if not wanting to break the fragile magic that was blossoming between them. They had gone from enemies, to fellow prisoners, to unlikely allies, and now, they stood on the threshold of something neither of them dared to name. On the final night before the contract officially expired, Lucas found Khloe in her studio. She was standing before a new canvas, but not painting. The moonlight streamed through the window, enveloping her in a silver glow. He stood in the doorway, afraid to enter, fearing his presence might shatter the peaceful moment. "Khloe," he called softly. She turned around. "The contract ends tomorrow," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Yes," he replied. "Theoretically, you'll be free." He walked in, approaching her. He didn't have a ring, no rehearsed performance. He only had the raw truth in his heart. "But I don't want you to go," he said, his voice trembling. "For 6 months, you showed me what a terrible man I was, but you also showed me the better man I could become. You destroyed me, Khloe. And for that, I will be forever grateful." He knelt on one knee on the paint-splattered floor, looking up at her, his eyes holding all his vulnerability, his remorse, and a deep, sincere love. "I love you," he said. "I know I don't deserve it. I know my past is a burden we will both have to carry. But I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve. Please, build a real life with me. Not a contract, not a wager. A life. Be my wife, again. But for real." The tears Khloe had held back for so many years finally fell. But these were tears of release, of happiness. "Yes, Lucas," she whispered. "Yes." Their second wedding was the complete opposite of the first. It took place in a small garden, with only a few close friends. Jack, now a more sober man, served as the best man. The Fawn family was there, smiling kindly. Khloe wore a simple white dress, and Lucas looked at her as if he were seeing the sun for the first time. Their vows were not empty words, but promises forged in the fires of hell and tempered by forgiveness. A few months later, Khloe told him the news. She was pregnant. Upon hearing the words, Lucas didn't cheer. He was just silent, and then tears began to stream down his face. He held her, burying his face in her hair and weeping, the silent, choked sobs of a man given a second chance he knew he could never earn. This was the final healing. A new life, a symbol of the future, born from their love. One evening, as they were looking at designs for the baby's room, Lucas handed Khloe a folder. "What's this?" she asked. "An idea," he said. "I want to use a significant portion of Marshall Global's assets and my personal fortune to start a charitable foundation. A foundation to support small businesses on the brink of being taken over, and to help families affected by corporate tragedies." Khloe read the proposal, her heart clenching with emotion. And I want to name it," he continued, his voice hesitant, "the David and Hope Foundation, in honor of your father. And the child we lost." She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes again. This was not just an act of atonement. This was an act of turning their greatest pain into their most beautiful legacy. It was a way of saying that the sacrifices of the lost were not in vain. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That's a wonderful idea." The final scene of their story is not in a glamorous penthouse, but in the office of the David and Hope Foundation. Lucas and Khloe stand side by side, looking out the window, not down at the city like rulers, but at a small neighborhood where a struggling bookstore has just received its first grant. Khloe rests her head on Lucas's shoulder, one hand on her growing belly. The past is still there, an indelible part of their story. But it is no longer a chain. It is now a foundation. From the ashes of a fateful wager, they had built not just a love, but a legacy of hope, for themselves and for others. And that was the greatest victory of all.